stage 2. This is where it starts to get fun. This is the trigger setup. Now, all I've got set up here is essentially, if you imagine a grid controller, this is 2 pads on that controller at the moment, and that's all. But I've only got it linked to one sound source currently. In reality, each of these pads would go to a separate sound source. I'll demonstrate the full setup later, but this is just to understand it for a start. So previously we had a meta module triggering a drum synth. Okay, and you can simply set the meta module actually to click the correct thing. It's probably inside actually on the can't remember how I did it now, to be honest, because I've done it differently that many different times. You can set it anyway so that if you hit it with a C5, it essentially stays latched and keeps looping round and round and round, arpeggiating. You just tell it to ignore the note offs, and then if you hit it with a C5 again, it will then stop arpeggiating, which is all fine and dandy, but it won't work how you want it to with a pad control, because if you have a second pad that also hits it with a C5, you can get it to, switch off with a trigger coming from a different source, but the trouble is it doesn't know if it's already playing or not. There's no memory, so you end up triggering parts that you don't want to trigger. So what you need to do is to create a variable which remembers whether a pad has triggered a part to be looping or not. So that's what this is doing here. I'm using an amplifier to set a variable, so it's just a 1-bit variable and it's on or off. So the logic is a pad on your controller connects to this multi-synth and it triggers a note, bang. So we play a note, then we use a pitch to control module to take that pitch and convert it into one of the controllers in the amplifier. And what it does is it alters the DC offset on the amplifier. So we give it some gain, so that you turn this up a little bit, and then the DC offset is parameter 3. So we basically want to set that to either 0 fully off or 1 fully on. So the pitch to control takes the incoming pitch from the multi-synth, and then it has a minimum value of on parameter 5, a minimum of 0, and a maximum of maximum, and it goes to controller 3. It's quite important that you set this to controller 3 before you connect it across to the amplifier, otherwise you'll muck all the other things up. So that's that one, and then we have a multi-synth here which receives a MIDI note in. Currently it's set up to receive all notes across the keyboard, which we don't actually want. But if I hit that, you'll see the DC offset in the amplifier will go to 1. So hit a note, goes to 1, and it stays there. So that's the variable that we've triggered. And then what I'm doing is, if we have a trigger from another pad, this one here, likewise it goes to pitch to control, and then you'll see minimum is 0, but maximum is also 0. So when we receive a note, it sends a 0 out to parameter 3 on the amplifier, so it sets it to 0. So we've got switch on, switch off. Okay, So if you imagine your pad controller with 4 pads in a vertical row, if you've hit pad 1, if you hit pad 2 in that row, you then want it to trigger the new clip, but you want to switch the previous one off. So that's what this is doing. So this would also this would route to meter module 1, like so. Okay, so trigger clip, and it sets it going. Okay, when we hit pad 2, what pad 2 would do, at the minute we've only routed it here to switch it off, but this would set its own meta module up. So we have another set of meta modules for each one of these, and then if we have, say, between 4 and 8 of these in a row, every single set of these in a row, as far as the off signal goes, they all connect to each other. So if you hit any pad, it switches all the other pads off in that row and triggers its own loop. So you can see these pitch controls, this stack here, we have quite a few of them. Now at the minute, this one here and also this one here will respond to any note on the keyboard, which we don't want, because if we're bringing everything in all on one MIDI channel and using a separate note on each pad, if you hit a note, it's just going to trigger the lot. So you don't want to do that. So you need to filter the MIDI input. So that's, for instance, if we set one of our pads to C5, it will trigger this one. If we set it to D5, it will trigger this one, and so on. So the way to do that is on the multi-synth, we basically, and it's pretty fiddly to set this up. You set these to 0. Okay, then you've got to find the one in the middle here that corresponds to C5 if you want to make this C5, which is a bit of a faff finding it, to be honest. I'd like there to be an easy way of doing this. See, I'm probably on the wrong note there, right? Like so. And then in the options, we want to ignore notes with 0 velocity and use static note C5, probably, I think. Like so. So then if we hit that, C6 for instance, shouldn't do anything in theory. You can see it doesn't. It should only do something when we actually hit the note that corresponds to that line that I've drawn, which is probably the wrong note. But here we go. Which one is it? Have I got C5? C5, you see, and it switches it on. So this one here, we'd want to do the same thing and probably set it for, let's set it for D5, shall we? Because at the minute it'll respond to anything. So again, let's try and find D5. This will be fun. Set them all to 0 for a start, of course. Trying to find D5, which is maybe that one. Really would just be able to like to put these in, but crikey. So to set 64 of these up is going to take you a little while. Is it that one? Let's see. So again, static C5 and ignore 0 velocity. So in theory, if that one's going, if I've chosen the right note, if I hit C6 for instance, it shouldn't be switching this off. It doesn't look. It's not going to do anything until I hit D5 and then it's off. So that's the setup for 2 pads. Now we need to set this up. I'm going to set up a grid of 4x4. So that's the next stage.